So we're on DAF Mem Dalet Amud Aleph, and the Gemara that you saw yesterday, was talking about a case of Rabbi Nehemiah. The Gemara tells us a Maisa about Rabbi Nehemiah. What happened with Rabbi Nehemiah was that he was so engrossed in his learning that he wandered outside of the Tichum. And they told Rav Chisda, they said, Rav Chisda, what are we going to do for Rabbi Nehemiah? He's wandered out. What are we going to do for him? So he said, well, there are people for whom that is still part of their tchum, so have them make a human wall on either side, so that he'll have mechitzas. He'll now have these partitions. They'll lead all the way into his old tchum, and that way he'll be able to walk in back to his tchum with impunity, and he'll be fine. And that's what they did. And the Gemara is now going to challenge the legality of that action. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shmuel. Thank you. The Gemara is going to challenge the legality of that because maybe that's not okay. So that's what we're up to. We're up to the Eisvei, which is about 9 lines from the top. Eisvei Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak L'Rava. So it says, Nafal Dofna, and we're talking about a sukkah in this brisa, that if the wall of the sukkah collapses, Lo Yamid Ba Adam Behema V'Kelim, you're not allowed to get a human being or an animal or stack utensils in order to replace that wall. You can't go over to a person and say, do me a favor, would you stand there? Oh, thanks. Do me a favor, would you just stand there for the next 8 hours while I
have a sukkah?
So that I can have my sukkah. You're not allowed to do that. Okay. And so below Yiskof es Hamita Lifros Aleha Sadin, nor are you allowed to turn a bed on its side and spread a sheet over it to make that as your makeshift wall. And the reason is Lefishein Osin Ohel Arai Batchila B'Yom Tov Vein Sarach Lomer B'Shabbos, because you're not allowed to make even a makeshift wall, an Ohel Arai, even a temporary wall or partition or tent, on Yom Tov, and certainly not on Shabbos. So what do you see from this brisa? That even making a wall out of humans is not permitted on Shabbos. So what right did Rav Chisda have to make this human wall to give Rabbi Nehemiah the right to walk back to his tchum?
But you don't need a tchum doesn't have to have a wall. It's just a line in the sand, so to speak. So why do you even need it? I mean.
Yes, but you see, the whole premise of this is based on the fact that we learned that if a person has an enclosure that extends beyond his tchum, he's allowed to come back into his tchum. Okay? So the Gemara says, Amarlei at amartli miha va'ana amina lacha miha. So Rava says, well, you presented me with a brisa, but I can present you with an equally powerful brisa going in the other direction. Here's this brisa. Osa adam es chavero doifen, kidei sheyochal v'yishta v'yoshe. A person can ask his friend to come over and act as a wall, which would enable him to eat, drink, and sleep in his sukkah. I mean, what can you imagine? Here, stand here for the next 8 hours, set up while I sleep, and don't move. That's a good friend. Or it's his kid or his wife.
Are you allowed to prop him up while he sleeps?
Right. The Yizkof es Amita, and similarly, you're allowed to prop up a bed, the Yifros Aleha Sadin, and spread over a sheet over it, Kidei Shelo Tipol Chama al Hameis ve'al Ha'ochlin, in order to protect either a corpse that has died out in the open, or food that's out in the open, and you want to protect it from getting spoiled. So this would be on Shabbos, I guess, where you're not allowed to move the mace, so you're allowed to prop up a partition to protect it from the sunlight. So the Gemara says, Kashana Hadadi, so you have a stira in brises. So what are you going to do with the stira? So lo kasha ha Rebbe Eliezer ha Rabbana. The answer is that it's a machlokas Rebbe Eliezer and the Chachamim. That according to Rebbe Eliezer, this is going to be Aser, and according to the Chachamim, it's Mutter. It's Nan. We've seen this multiple times in Masechah Shabbos, Pekaka chalon, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Bisman Shekashur V'talui Pokikin Bo Vimlav Ein Pokikin Bo. The Rabbi Eliezer says that if you have, remember our famous window in the wall, the window has a shutter. The shutter is this block of wood that you'd stick into the wall to seal off the window. So Rabbi Eliezer says the only time that you're allowed to do that on Shabbos is if the shutter is tethered to the wall already, and it's not dragging on the ground. It's suspended from the string. So the Chachamim omrim ben kach uven kach pokikin bo. The Chachamim say no, that even when it's not tethered and when it's just lying on the floor, you're allowed to create this addition to the wall. You're allowed to do that lechatchila on Shabbos. So you see that according to the Chachamim, making a wall is okay as long as it's a makeshift wall. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. V'ha itmar Allah amar Rabba bar Barchana amar Rabbi Yechanan hakol modim shein osin oal aray batchila biyom tov ein tzarich lomer b'Shabbos. That wait a minute. Rabbi Yechanan had already established regarding this machlokes that Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim both agree that to make a brand new standalone wall, even if it's a temporary wall, that's forbidden. Lo nechlaku elo lahosif sheRabbi Eliezer omer ein mosifin b'yom tov ein tzarich lomer b'Shabbos v'chachamim omer mosifin b'Shabbos ein tzarich lomer b'yom tov. The machlokes is only vis-a-vis adding to an existing wall. That's where there's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. You have a wall, it has a hole in it, and you want a window in it, and you want to seal it. That's where there's a machlokes. Are you allowed to augment an existing wall with additional wall space? That's where there's a machlokes. But at l'chaura, they would both agree that it's forbidden to make a makeshift wall that's standalone, brand new on its own. So how can you apply that machlokes to here? Elalo kasha. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, we'll have to reconcile it some other way. Ha karebi Meir, ha karebi Yehuda. There's another machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as to whether you're allowed to make a makeshift wall. The Tanya asala behema dofen l'sukkah. That you'll see. What are we talking about? We're talking. Let's go back to our case of sukkah. The Mishnah says that if a person brings an animal over, and he needs to make his additional wall to the sukkah for it to be kosher, his wall fell down. So if he brings over an animal and has it sit there, and that animal acts as a kosher wall, so Rabbi Meir posel to Rabbi Yehuda machshir. This is a machlokas. Rabbi Meir says it's posel, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. Now, why does Rabbi Meir say that it's posel? Rabbi Meir says it's posel because he's concerned that you can't control an animal if it's not tied up. The animal could always pick itself up and walk away. So therefore, it's not a kosher wall at all. Even when the animal is just sitting there, it's not a kosher wall because it's so haphazard. It's so skittish. The whole thing is so tenuous. There's no way to know whether the wall is going to remain or not, so therefore it's not a wall at all. And Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. So the machlokas would be as follows. Rabbi Meir de kapasul hasam amalav mechitzahi hachashari delav midi ka'avid. So according to Rabbi Meir, the reason why it's okay to create a wall out of an animal is because it's not a halachic addition. It's not a halachic wall. And therefore, since you're not really creating anything that has halachic substance to it, therefore it's permitted to make this makeshift kind of wall on Shabbos or Yantiv, because it doesn't have any halachic import to it.
What is the word halachic? I mean, the concept of a halachic.
It doesn't qualify as a real wall. It doesn't qualify as a real wall because if it can't be used as an additional wall to a sukkah, so then it doesn't qualify as a real wall.
How do you use it?
That's not something that the Gemara addresses just yet. It's a good question, Bob. Well, then why does the Brisa say that you can use it to augment your sukkah? That's an interesting question that the Gemara doesn't ask. Rashi says there are a number of challenges to this statement that we're making now, and that would be one of them. But you'll see we're going to reject this in a moment anyway. The Rabbi Yehuda to kamach shir hasam. So Rabbi Yehuda, however, who says that this is a wall of import in halacha, this is a valid sukkah wall, therefore he would tell you that you're not allowed to create it on Yantiv. So the Gemara is going to ask a number of questions. First of all, the tispera. Does this really make any sense? First of all, Reb Meir only disqualified this wall when it's made from an animal. But he didn't disqualify a wall that's made from a human or made from inanimate objects, There you don't have the concern that the animal is skittish and is going to run away. By a human being, you can communicate with the human being; he'll stay there. By inanimate objects, they're not going anywhere. So there, since the brisa that said that that you're allowed to make this wall was talking about not only an animal, but was talking about humans and kalim as well. How do you use this to say that this is going like Reb Meir? Visu, I'll ask you another question. Rabbi Meir aliba deman. If you're telling me that Rabbi Meir unconditionally holds that you can make a wall as long as it's a haphazard kind of wall, then I have a problem. So who does he go according to in our discussion about the case of the shutter? I aliba de Rabbi Eliezer lahosif nami asa. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you can't even augment an existing wall with a haphazard shutter. So surely you can't create a new wall, even if it's a haphazard wall. Ella aliba de Rabbanan, Emar damri Rabbanan lahosif lachatchila mi'amur. And you can't even go according to the Chachamim in the shutter case, because they only permit you to augment a pre-existing wall. But to create a whole new wall, even if it's a makeshift wall, they're not going to permit you to do. So therefore you can't tell me that Rabbi Meir fits into this whole construct. Rabbi Meir is specifically, exclusively talking about an animal. So, Ella ha v'ha Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, okay, so we have to reconcile it some other way. Remember, we have two brises. One brisa says that you're not allowed to make a makeshift wall even out of humans and kalim and a behema. And the other brisa says you are allowed to make a makeshift wall that way. So the answer is they're both going according to the Chachamim. The kalim ha-kalim lo kasha. So first of all, if you look carefully in the brisa, what the Gemara is going to do is going to dissect each brisa. When one brisa says that you're allowed to use kalim and another brisa says that you're not allowed to use kalim, these inanimate objects, to make a new wall, ha-b'dofen shlishis, ha-b'dofen revius. The difference between the two of them is the one brisa that says that you're not allowed to make a wall out of kalim is when you're using these kalim as a necessary wall for the sukkah because they're acting as the third wall. That's when the brisa says that it doesn't work, because since you're making this wall on Yantif itself to turn your non-kosher sukkah into a kosher sukkah, you're doing a real substantive act of construction which is not permitted on Yantif. But let's say I already have three kosher walls. I already have a kosher sukkah. And I only just want to have some, let's say, protection from the elements. I want to prevent the breeze from coming in and blowing out my candles. Whatever my reason is, I just want to prop up some utensils to stop the wind from coming in. So that's okay, because that has no halachic import. It's not a substantive partition that you're creating, and therefore it's not a problem. Dikanami, dikatani, nafal dofna, shmamina. You can infer this, that that's the correct interpretation of the first brisa, because it talks about the wall falling down. The wall falling down implies that without this wall, the sukkah is not kosher, and that's why you replace it with kalim. So that would explain why the brisa doesn't allow you to do that.
Why can't you just pick the wall up? I mean, if you can move all these other things in there.
There's a problem with muksa, right? First of all, the wall may have disintegrated completely, but even if the wall hasn't disintegrated, but there's a problem with muksa. The walls of the sukkah are muksa. And anyway, so then the Gemara says, Ella Adama Adam Kasha. So that's only going to explain the part of the brisa that we've dissected out, referring to Kalim. But what are you going to do about Adam? Because by Adam, in both brisas, the implication is that you're using the human being to allow you to sit in the sukkah. Because even the brisa that says that you're permitted to use Adam, it says by the Adam, it says, Ada osa Adam es chaveru dofen kidei sheyochal v'yishte v'yoshen. You're allowed to make your friend into a wall to enable you to eat, sleep, and drink in the sukkah. So you see very clearly that the human being is being used to make your sukkah kosher. So why is that permitted? So the Gemara answers, kan lada'as, kan shalol midas. Answers the Gemara that a human being is different from Kalim. Kalim, I can understand that you're not allowed to make even a makeshift wall lechatchila on Shabbos or Yantiv if that wall qualifies as a halachic construct. That I understand, because kalim, inanimate objects, is what you make walls out of. A human being, it really is permitted to use a human being as a makeshift wall on Shabbos or Yontif, with one proviso. The proviso is that he, the human being, is not aware that he's being exploited and made into a wall. You say to your friend, do me a favor, Yankel, just stand right there. No, move over a little bit to the left. Oh, perfect. Stay there for 4 hours, right? In other words, if you don't tell him, if you don't tell him why, but you tell him, I just want to schmooze with you. By the way, how's your wife? How's the kids? Right? And he just starts schmoozing with him. Then, and he's not aware of it, so then it's a kosher sukkah, and you haven't done anything illegal by making a makeshift wall. But when Yankel is aware that he's being made into a wall, so the Chachamim forbade that. The Chachamim said that it's only permitted when the person is unaware. So, and again, I guess it's like a rabbinic fence to prevent people from making walls on Yontif. So the Gemara now says, so then that would reconcile the two brises. But wait a minute, let's go back to our original story about Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia needed to get back inside his tchum, so Rav Chisda instructed people, stand there to make a wall so that he can get back in. V'hada Rabbi Nechemia bereid Rabbi Chaniloi l'das hava. That people apparently knew what was going on. So the Gemara says, no, shalomi das hava. The answer is that they didn't know. Rav Chisda gave them the instructions, Chevra, I need your help. You stand there, you stand there, you stand there, you stand there. And they stood there, and then Rabbi Nechemia came through. The Gemara says, but Rav Chisda miha l'das hava. But Rav Chisda knew what was going on. And says the Gemara, Rav Chisda shalomin haminyan hava. Rav Chisda was not one of the guys standing there. He was not part of the human wall. So therefore, it was basically the Rebbe hat gesagt. The Rebbe said, I got to stand there, so I'm going to stand there. I don't know why the Rebbe told me to stand there, but I'll stand there. And that's why it was a valid wall, because the Talmidim who were standing there were not aware as to why they were standing there. Hanahu b'nei ginana de'a'ilu maya b'mechitza shel b'nei adam nagdin hu Shmuel. That there were these certain farmers that on Shabbos they needed to gain access to water that was in a Rishus Harabim, and so they made a human wall, a human partition, to enable them to bring the water from Rishus Harabim into Rishus Hayachid. Shmuel put these farmers into cherem. He put a ban upon them because they did a no-no. Amar im amru shalom midas yomru ladas. Shmuel said that the heter was only stated for people who are unaware that they're being made into a wall. But you guys know exactly what you're doing, and you're doing this. You're exploiting the halacha, and therefore I'm going to put a ban on what you're doing. Anahu ziki dahavashajin baristika demechuza. So there were these flasks that belonged to Rava that were laying out in Rishus Harabim, and there was a fear that they were either going to be taken or they were going to be damaged. And Bahadi da'asa Rava mipirke a'alino nihale. So what they did is that Rava was giving a drasha nearby, and there was a whole crowd of people that went to listen to him. And the way that the crowd was configured, they were surrounding the area where the flasks were in Rishus Harabim, so they comprised the human wall, and thus that enabled them to bring the flasks from the Rishus Harabim into Rabbi's house, so that he would be able to have the flasks. L'shabta achriti bo'i ailinhu v'asher lahu dahavalei kiladas. The asr. That the following Shabbos, the same scenario happened. The flasks were left out again. But this time Rava said, no, now you can't do it, because now that people last Shabbos heard what had happened, now if we do it again, it's going to be as if people are now aware that they're being made into a wall, and therefore it's going to be aser. Levi a'ilu leitivna ze'iri aspasta Rav Shimi Barchia Maya. The Gemara then just says that this was not an isolated incident with just Rava. There were other Amoraim as well who utilized this human wall method. For Levi, they were able to bring him straw into his home, and for Ze'eri, they were able to bring in fodder, and for Rav Shimi Barchia, they were able to bring in water using this method. But again, with the proviso that the people who comprise the human wall are not aware that they are being made into a wall. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Misha Yatsa Birshus. Now the next case of the Mishnah. Remember, we learned in the previous Mishnah that if a person is forcibly removed from his tchum, he's really stuck. He only has dalet amos. He only has 4 amos, right? That he can't really move beyond 4 amos out of where he is. But here we're talking about a person who is given permission to leave his tchum. Now, why would a person be given permission to leave his tchum? Well, one could be an emergency. It could be something where someone's life is at stake. Let's say a woman is a midwife, and she's told that there's a woman outside your tchum that's about to give birth. We need you to come help give birth. That would be one reason. Another reason is that I hear that there's a band of marauders that are coming to harm some Jews. Let's go help them. Or another situation could be not where there's a danger to life, but for the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. We know that when a person sights the new moon, the Chachamim suspended the rules of Tchumen to allow that person to act as a witness, to travel to Yerushalayim to testify. So he's allowed to. So he's left his Tchum now, and he's now outside of his Tchum. V'amr lo kvar nasa ma'isa. And then someone taps him on the shoulder and says, "Excuse me, Reb Yid, we don't need you anymore. We already got the testimony. The mother already had the baby. The marauders have left. Your services are no longer required." So the halacha is yesh lo alpayim amma l'chol ruach. So in that scenario, he now has 2,000 amas from where he is currently standing. We don't limit him to now 4 amas because, after all, he was given permission to leave. So instead, we give him 2,000 amas in every direction. Now that may not be enough to bring him home, but at least he can go 2,000 amas in every direction. Im haya b'sochat tchum ki'ilu lo yatsa. Then the Mishnah makes a cryptic statement. It says that if he hasn't yet left the tchum where he started, so it's as if he never left. Now what does that mean?
Well, so he's still in his tchum.
If he's still in his tchum, it's as if he's never left. What do you mean it's as if he didn't leave? It's not as if he never left.
Right.
He mamish never left. So that statement is bizarre. It doesn't make any sense.
Unless they just expanded his tchum.
Well, we'll see. The Gemara is going to explain in just a moment. Kol hayotzim lahatzil chozin l'makom. And the next cryptic statement is that anyone who is leaving the tchum in order to help save is allowed to go back to their place. What that means also, that we don't understand, the Gemara will have to explain it tomorrow. Now, first the question is, Mai im haya b'sochat tchum ki'ilu lo yatsa. What does it mean that if a person is within his tchum, it's as if he never left? That doesn't make any sense. Amar Rabba hachi kamar im haya b'soch tchum shalo ki'ilu lo yatsa mitoch beis odami. The Gemara says that if, let's say, my tchum is defined by my house where I reside, so I'm walking about to leave my tchum, but I'm still within the 2,000 amas of my house, it's as if I never left my house, and I can go back, and I still have my original house as my central point of being where I was kind of shvisa. So the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? No. Mahu detei mahol ve'okar okar kamash malon. You might have thought that once I've been given sanction by the Chachamim to leave my tchum, then wherever I am, at the moment when I discover that my services are no longer required, that's my new central point center point of being Konesh Visa. So maybe I have 2,000 amas in all directions from this point. Now that's a chumrah and it's a kula. It's a chumrah because if let's say I move to the west, I'm limited now 2,000 amas from this point. I can't go any further west beyond 2,000 amas. But it's also a kula because now I could extend my border further west an additional 2,000 amas from where I'm standing, which is well beyond where I originally was. So you might think that that's the case. Kamash Malan, that no, that's not the case. You actually, since you never left your original boundaries, you go back to your status of where your house was. So that's one explanation. Rav Shimi Bar Chia Amar Hachi Kamar. He has a different interpretation, and he says, Im hayu tchumin shenaslo chachamim muvloin b'sochat tchum shalo ki ilu lo yatsa mitchuma. He says what it means is that in the event that you leave the tchum, and then someone taps you on the shoulder saying we don't need you, right? But let's say you've only left a little bit beyond your 2,000 amas, such that your new place of where you're Konesh Visa, you have a 2,000 amma radius, and your new 2,000 amma radius intersects with your old 2,000 amma radius. So in that scenario, since you were given permission initially to have the radius from your house, and now you're given a new radius from where you are, which is perfectly sanctioned, then we look at these two intersecting radii as being one unit, and therefore you're allowed to traverse from one radius to the other radius. And you can go all the way back home. Even if your home is beyond the 2,000 amas from where you presently are, but since the two radii intersect, you can go all the way back home.
Like you've got 4,000.
It's basically like you got 4,000 instead of 2,000, yeah. So the Gemara now says, B'maikam iflugi. So what's the machlokas here between the first opinion, which was Rabba, and the second opinion was Rabbi Shimi Bar Chia? Mar Savar Havlo Astchumen Milsei, or Mar Savar Lav Milsei. One opinion is that intersecting radii is a halachic reality, and therefore you can go from one circle to the other circle. And the other one says no, it's meaningless. Wherever you are now, this is your permanent station until Shabbos is over, and you cannot go into the intersecting tchum. So the Gemara now says, Amar le Abaye le Rabba, va'at lo tispera da'hablas tchum and milsei. Abaye says, let me prove to you that you have to acknowledge that intersecting radii are allowable. Uma ilu Shabbos ba'ma'ara shebesocha arba'as alafim v'algaga pachos me'arba'as alafim ama lo nimsa mahalach eskula v'chutzal alpayim ama. Now, in order to understand this case, it would be good to imagine a guy who's going to make Shabbos in a mountain. Now, when I say in a mountain and not on a mountain, I mean that deliberately, because the mountain is hollow. And the mountain has two entrances to it. It's like basically a mountain cave. And the mountain cave has two entrances. It's got an eastern entrance and it's got a western entrance. So you got to think about it this way. And also the top of the mountain is flat. Okay? So you have a picture. So it's in your Gemara, it's an approximate picture. It's not such a great picture. But I'm just asking you to imagine that scenario. See, he decides that he's going to make Shabbos inside this mountain cave. And it's a very, very large mountain cave. It's very, very wide, to the point where the base of the mountain is 4,000 amas from one edge of the mountain to the other at the base of the mountain where the two entrances are. Now, in this scenario, because he's got two entrances leading into an enclosed area, you really have 2,000 amas from the eastern entrance, and you have 2,000 amas from the western entrance. Now let's say when I walk outside of the eastern entrance of the cave, instead of walking outside the mountain, I decide to go up the mountain. By going up the mountain, I also have 2,000 amma, I'm within my 2,000 amma radius from where my center point is, which is the entrance to the cave, the eastern entrance to the cave. But the concern is as follows. If the top of the mountain is narrow, because it's tapered inwards, such that there's less than 2,000 amas at this flat top of the mountain, so then I could understand how I can traverse the top of the cave. But let's say the top of the mountain is quite wide, and it's almost as wide as the bottom of the mountain. So would I be allowed to traverse from one end of the mountaintop to the other end of the mountaintop? So Abaye says, well, let's think about it. If your radius is determined from two places, one from the eastern entrance and one from the western entrance, then the only way that you'd be allowed to traverse from one side of the mountaintop to the other is if it's less than 4,000 amas at the top of the mountain, because then you'd have two intersecting radii from the place of where the entrance of the mountain is. Because basically you have two places where you're kona shvisa, one at the western entrance and one at the eastern entrance. And so at the top of the mountain, which is part of the two radii, if those circles intersect, then fine, you can traverse all the way from one side of the mountaintop to the other. But if those circles do not intersect, because it's more than 4,000 amas at the top of the mountain, then you will not be able to get from the eastern end of the mountain to the western end of the mountain by walking over the top. You'll have to go down the mountain, go through the eastern entrance, come out of the western entrance, climb back up the mountain in order to get to the other side of the mountaintop, because otherwise you'd be going outside the tchum. Obviously, we're talking about a very, very large mountain. Someone told me that 2,000 amas is conceivably about a mile, right? So we're talking about a mountaintop that's a couple of miles wide, right? Which is, it's not inconceivable. Plenty of mountains that are that big, but right, okay, but that's what we're dealing with over here. So Abaya's argument is, don't you agree, Rabbi, that as long as the mountaintop is narrower than 4,000 amas, you'll be able to go from one side of the mountain to the other side because of these intersecting radii? So how can you not acknowledge that intersecting radii is a halachic reality? So the answer, Amar Lei, V'lo shani lach ben heicha deshavas ba'avir mechitzos mi ba'od yom, v'laheicha v'lo shavas ba'avir mechitzos mi ba'od yom. So Rabbi's response is, that's a different case though. Because in that case, your two radii are established simultaneously at the onset of Shabbos. Because I want to be inside this cave over Shabbos, the two entrances to the cave are established as my simultaneous center points, two independent center points, because I can either go out from the western side or go out from the eastern side. And therefore, they're two legitimately established center points for my tchum at two different points simultaneously. And that's why when they intersect on top of the mountain, then it's acceptable. But over here, what was the case? I started Shabbos with my center point as my home. Then I got permission to do a mitzvah to save someone's life, to leave my tchum and establish a new tchum. That's not two tchumen that are occurring simultaneously. They're occurring, one was at the onset of Shabbos, and then one is later, and the first one is now disposed of. It's not like they're happening, I'm not being given the reshus at the same time. First I had this one in my home, and now I'm given this tchum as a replacement for the one in my home. And therefore it's not intersecting radii anymore. The original radius that I had is no longer existent. And that's why, just because my old tchum and my new tchum intersect, it means nothing. That's the reason, says Rabbi, that intersecting radii in our case are not a halachic reality to enable me to get back home.
Why am I allowed to have two entrances, like to be in the mountain? I mean, how come I'm allowed to have those two?
Didn't we say a week ago you can't make two eruvim because the same brera?
Yes,
you
yes.
have to pick which one you want.
Yes, but in this situation, because the two entrances are on either side of my enclosure, of my enclosed space, it's not like I'm deciding which one I'm going to leave out of. Both of them are equally valid as places of where I'm koine shvisa, because the whole mountain is my place of being koine shvisa. So I can either leave, I have 2,000 amas from there, and I have 2,000 amas from there, because it's all part of the same structure. It's only when I go outside of the mountain and go on the top of the mountain that I have this dilemma of, because it's so wide.
So indoors doesn't apply.
Right, right.
And obviously this wouldn't apply if we hold that 10, that the tchum doesn't apply above 10 amos high.
Right, it's 10 tfachim. Right, right. So that was the discussion that you had yesterday. Okay. But again, it depends on how the mountain is structured. If it's a slowly ascending slope, so it could be considered to be part of the ground. Anyway.
So the 2,000 amos is really 3D. It's not, we think on a flat plane. It's really, you're talking up.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's 3D. Yes. So now the Gemara says, "Ve'echa delo shavas lo." You mean to tell me that if the two center points of my tchumen were not acquired simultaneously, I cannot use intersecting radii? The Hatnan Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Shtayim Yikones Gimelo Yikones. Now we're going to see, there's a Mishnah that we're going to see tomorrow. The Mishnah on the bottom of the page says that according to Rabbi Eliezer, if a person inadvertently walks outside the tchum, so we know that he's limited to 4 amos. Rabbi Eliezer says when we say 4 amos, it's not a 4 amma radius, it's a 4 amma diameter and you're the center point of that circle. So which means you have a 2 amma radius in all directions. That's according to Rabbi Eliezer.
How big if I hear 10
An amma is about 1.5 feet.
So you're going to stand there for Shabbat?
You're going to stand there for Shabbos, exactly.
You practically can't sit down.
Yeah, okay. So anyway,
I thought it was 6 feet, no? Is that 1.5 feet?
4 ammas is 6 feet. An amma is about 1.5 feet to 2 feet.
So 2,000 ammas is nowhere near a mile. It's
It's
only about
4
600 feet.
No,
No.
2,000 hours would be 4,000 feet, and the mile is 5,280 feet.
552.
So it's about 80% of the mile.
How
Yeah.
do you get 4,000?
2,000 times 2, if you go
Oh,
to
yeah.
the larger
Yeah.
metric.
All right. And in any event,
4,000 hours.
what Rabbi Eliezer says is that if a person steps just outside the 2,000 amma border, as long as he's within 2 ammas of that 2,000, he's like 2,001 and a half, 2,001 and a half outside, so then he's allowed to step back in because you have intersecting radii. He's got his current radius of 2 ammas, and he's got the old radius of 2,000, which intersect with each other. So as long as it's not more than 2 ammas, he's allowed to step back in. So my lab Rabbi Eliezer l'taime, the Amar v'hu be'emsan, ba'arba amas li'avu le'rabban kamanda mivla, damu kamar yikanes. So what's the case? It's as we just explained, because Rabbi Eliezer holds that you have a 2 amma radius, and that 2 amma radius intersects with your old 2,000 amma radius, and since they're intersecting, you're allowed to go back in. And here again, you have the old tchum, you have the new tchum of the 2 ammas radius. So therefore, since they're intersecting, the old is intersecting with the new. You can step back in. It's the same case as ours. Alma have lost tchum and milsi. So you see that it should work. The case that we discussed before. So Amar lei Rabba bar bar Chana le'Abaye umidei Rabbi Eliezer kamos v'slei lamar. So Rabba bar bar Chana says to Abaye, "What are you talking about? You're challenging from Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the Chachamim have to agree to Rabbi Eliezer. Could be a machlokas tanoim whether we allow intersecting tchumen or not." So Amar lei in the Shamia liminei demar ad kan lo pligi rabbanon lei de Rabbi Eliezer ela lidvar harishus. Because you'll see the Chachamim are not as liberal as Rabbi Eliezer as far as stepping back into your old tchum. But that's only because you didn't leave with permission to go ahead and do a mitzvah. But if you go and leave to do a mitzvah, the Chachamim are very liberal. So you see that the Chachamim would agree to Rabbi Eliezer if you're going to do a mitzvah, which is the case of our Mishnah. So in the case of our Mishnah, where you have intersecting tchumen, there's no reason why they shouldn't agree to the halacha that when you have intersecting radii, that you should be allowed to go from one radius to the other, one circle to the other circle, since they're intersecting. And that's the end of the challenge of Abaye. Why doesn't Rabba hold of the concept of intersecting radii? And we'll continue Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
What's the practical tchum for us in Torornto? I mean, how far can I go? Where's the center point of the
Well, it's the edge of the city.
Which is what?
No. A city is not defined by the municipal lines. A city is defined by places of habitation. And as long as there is no interruption of inhabitable spaces, so then that's considered to be a continuation of the city. So if in theory you had houses contiguously from here to Lake Simcoe, that would be all part of the same tchum, and you could continue walking.